All right, hello everyone. And I know it's the same background we saw last week. I like it so much, right? Look, there's a little dolphin down there and this little whatever that is. And this week we're talking about pregnancy and development and delivery and all sorts of cool things. So let's begin. Sorry. Okay. All right, because this is what it's all about, and I really like how the book describes it on all aspects of whether it's the reproductive system or pregnancy, how everything is just unforgivingly sequential. You know, he and she have to be in the right place at the right time, and she has to be at the right place in her estrus cycle, and then all these things have to line up to make this little cutie pie. So with that in mind, let's begin. I wanted to start though by talking about the uterus, obviously, kind of an important part. And but I didn't really talk to you about some of the different layers because these are going to show up today. So first of all, the uterus is kind of shaped like the letter Y. We've got these two horns, and then we have the body of the uterus here that then would lead into the cervix. And it's kind of amazing. This is a human uterus, but different animals, the uteruses will look very different. A rabbit's uterus versus a cow's uterus versus a dog. So, but they all have these same three layers. The innermost layer is called the endometrium. It's made up of epithelial cells, glandular cells, um, and it's important because it's what gets kind of thick and juicy in the words of the book during estrus, in preparation for pregnancy, in the possibility that an embryo is going to implant. The next layer is the myometrium. That's the thickest layer, and that's the layer of smooth muscle. Myo means muscle, and metrium, I think, means uterus. This outer layer is the perimetrium, but we don't really care about that. But you will see the endometrium and the myometrium show up in the process of pregnancy and development. Okay, there's going to be some kind of gruesome pictures and just some plain old awkward pictures. So I frequently feel like this gentleman right here when I give this talk, and I've added things and taken away things, but still some of this conversation that we're going to have is exactly what no teacher ever wants to talk about. So let's talk about erections. That's kind of the first part here. The male side of the story is to get an erection, and different animals have different kinds of looking penises, but the process is very similar on how the erection forms. Here, of course, this would be an intact male cat with those little barbs. Here's a bull with his penis. There's a horse with his penis. The process of erection refers to the enlargement and stiffening of the penis. It's under parasympathetic control, and what happens is arteries will dilate, and so blood can flow in, but it won't flow out. As blood flows into the connective tissue, it actually will compress the veins so that blood can't leave. This has kind of a tourniquet effect. If you don't know what a tourniquet is, that's a person cuts their arm, and then someone will tie a tourniquet around the arm to stop the bleeding. So this compression has kind of a tourniquet effect. It allows the penis to enlarge via hydraulic pressure. That's how it works in most animals. Um, the book mentions things like the corpus spongiosum and, corpus cavernosum. I am not going to ask you any questions about that. Okay. But there it is. These are some of the structures that are important in the penis. The dog does have that os penis. So that's kind of a unique thing in dogs. It's a bone in the penis and it can break. So that's important to know. Anyway, so this is how erection works in most animals. Boars and ruminants like cows and goats and sheep are a little different. You remember they have this strange little S curve called the sigmoid flexure. And so the sigmoid flexure actually plays a role in how they get an erection. The sigmoid flexure during erection, will actually unbend, and so that will extend and lengthen the penis so that the bull can, or whatever, can then do the next step. And before we talk about the next step, there are some problems that you will see with penises. This is a condition where there's this is not a normal penis. There's this weird little flap of tissue here that's kind of kinking the penis around. So this it's not a problem for the animal, but when they pee, they're going to pee sideways. This is a birth defect. So they'll pee backwards, and they will never get anybody pregnant because the semen will all shoot the wrong direction. Carolyn talked about this condition where the penis is engorged and it cannot, that tourniquet effect is going beyond normal. And so these dogs, we can put sugar on the penis to try to reduce swelling. Certain drugs will cause those blood vessels to dilate. Sometimes we want to do that. If we want to examine a horse's penis, we could give them acepromazine. But the thing is, there are certain horses where they're used for breeding, and if we cause the penis to dilate, they could injure it. They could get a hematoma or a laceration. So we try to avoid this one drug called acepromazine that you've learned about in pharmacology. We use it as a sedative, but it causes peripheral blood vessels to dilate. So, and there's even a surgery that we can do. I don't think it's done very often, but it's where you take the penis and you basically move it off to one side, and then you use that bowl for heat detection. He'll try to mount the cow, but he won't be able to get her pregnant because his penis is deviated off to one side. And the farmers sometimes put this little chin harness so that when he mounts her, there's a paintball in there and it'll mark her. And then the farmer knows, oh, that cow's in heat because my Gomer bull detected it. And then the farmer can check her and breed her. And then one last thing about, it's not really about penises as much as it is about the desire for the bull to potentially mount you is this. Dairy bulls can be deadly. They don't really fear humans the way the beef bull might. They're very accustomed to being around people. So if you're ever at a dairy, be very careful about the dairy bull. Most dairies, fortunately, don't even have a dairy bull anymore. So it's not really an issue. But when I worked on dairies, there were a few that still had pens with dairy bulls to try to get cows pregnant, and they were very scary. All right. So so of course the actual act of mating is called copulation. I have a little video here of a dog. I don't know, maybe you've never seen animals copulate. So I thought I would just include that. Most animals will do it in this position. The camelids, so alpacas, llamas, and camels, the female will actually cush. Um, that's that kneeling position that you may have heard of before. But anyway, so this poor little dog, I don't know if you can see it, but his penis is just off to one side, and so he's never going to get her pregnant. I don't know what the owner can do, if they can actually reach in there and try to help him out. I don't know. Anyway, that's copulation, and if that guy can ever get the penis into the vagina, I told you this would be awkward, then he can ejaculate, and that's this expulsion of semen from the penis. It, 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 it actually happens in two phases. First, the spermatozoa, which are, remember, they're being stored in the epididymis. They'll move up the vas deferens and pick up fluid from the accessory sex glands, and that gets moved into the urethra, and then smooth muscle in the urethra will actually move the semen and spermatozoa into the female. I don't actually know how the spermatozoa get up the vas deferens. Maybe there's smooth muscle there too. It's interesting, there's actually the bladder sphincter muscles will close to prevent sperm from going the wrong direction into the bladder. But some do, and if you ever do a urinalysis on an intact male dog, you will, it's normal to find some sperm there. So look for that. Anyway, most animals, most males, they deposit the sperm into the vagina. Somehow, horses and pigs, I don't know how, they actually are able to deposit the sperm through the cervix into the uterus. I don't know how. Now remember, we saw this last week. I'm going to skip over the first part. Is going to it shows you this is an ovary. There's a follicle. It's about to ovulate, and then the start of the oviduct here. The little fingers of the infundibulum are going to catch the egg, and it's going to travel up the oviduct. But and there's little hairs called cilia that are helping to sweep it along, okay? But then here come the sperm. Now these sperm, they have got a long way to travel. It would normally take them hours through some hostile environments, right? The uterus is fairly acidic, but it does not take them an hour. It only takes them a few minutes. And the reason is because estrogen and other hormones have sort of primed the myometrium to help sweep those little sperm towards the oviduct. And those little cilia are also going to help move them towards the oviduct because they need to be ready to fertilize that egg. And that refers, and these to be ready to fertilize the egg refers to capacitation. There's little changes that take place in the sperm that will allow the sperm to penetrate and fertilize the egg. Most of these changes are kind of subtle, but there is one that's kind of dramatic, and that's on his head. There's this thing called the acrosome that's full of enzymes. And as the sperm approaches the egg, this little seal comes off, and these enzymes are exposed. So why would the head of a sperm need enzymes? Well, we'll find out. Watch what happens. This shows a little sperm. He's going to capacitate. You don't really, it doesn't really show you the enzymes, but you see he's kind of changing how he swims. right? I don't know. The green is the enzymes. Okay, now they're right there at his head. These other guys should capacitate too. Anyway, so that's the ovum, and you'll notice the ovum is it's a cell, but it actually has these different layers on it. We'll talk about. So the enzymes are used to try to get through those layers. That's why he needs the enzymes. Um, the the one layer is called the corona radiata. It's made up of cells. When the ovum came out of the follicle, it brings these little cells with them, um, and it gives it kind of this kind of fluffy appearance. Maybe that's why they're called cumulus cells. But that's the corona radiata. And then there's this other layer called the zona pellucida, and that's this thick gel that surrounds the ovum. And that's really what he needs the enzymes through. In fact, you can see him, or it's an it, it's not a him. You can see the sperm. The enzymes are helping the sperm penetrate the zona pellucida. And you see some of that in this other video too. So again, here are the sperm coming around the corner. There's the ovum and all those fluffy zona radiata cells. Anyway, it's just called the zona radiata. But like the sperm have to get through there. This little video does not show you the zona pellucida, but once the sperm gets through, only one sperm can fertilize one egg. Once he gets through, the ovum actually makes this change that will prevent any second or third sperm from entering. And there's a video on the Start Here page that shows what happens next. Now, before I show you what happens next, I just want to point out, if you find that you really love what it's called theriogenology, but it's the science of reproduction, of helping deal with fertility issues and pregnancy issues. And if you really love it, there are places around here that specialize in theriogenology. Up in Grass Valley, there's the Serious Canine Fertility Center. It's a sperm bank. They get sperm shipped in from all over the world. There are people who will, it's kind of like a fertility clinic for dogs and cats. And I used to work with them a little bit. People would want to get their dog pregnant. They weren't being successful, and they'd have, there was a procedure I would do where I would put the sperm directly into the uterus. It was a little weird, but it worked. I just wanted to show you this little video here. Well, I'll let you, if you want to, you can watch it. It shows what's called transcervical insemination, where they're actually going up this little dog's cervix to deposit sperm in the uterus. So you can watch that if you're interested. Okay, so what's going to happen next? So now the sperm and the egg are one. We call that fertilized ovum a zygote. That's what you're seeing right here. And then his, little haploid number of chromosomes and her haploid number of chromosomes will come together to restore that diploid chromosome number. They call his the pronucleus, that half, like half of a nucleus. Anyway, and then things get really exciting. Suddenly, the zygote begins to divide via mitosis. It happens so quickly, they give it the name cleavage, but it's still just mitosis. And I'll show you a video in a moment. So it turns into a 2-cell stage, a 4-cell stage, and a 16 or 8-cell stage. I don't remember. It keeps dividing and dividing until it looks like this little blackberry or raspberry that we call the morula. So these are all lots of little cells. Meanwhile, it's moving down the oviduct. It takes about 2 or 3 days. And and then it kind of forms this hollow center with these other little cells, and that's called a blastocyst. And at that point, it's getting a little too big. It needs to implant in the uterine wall. So what you're seeing here, this is a zygote, and it's going to start dividing. So that's divided into two, and then it's moving down the oviduct. Now there's 4 little cells of, whatever animal or student. And then, now it's starting to resemble the morula. So it's going to divide a few more times. Right now it's a morula. It's this little raspberry. And at some point it's, okay, well, all right. So now it's a blastocyst. Okay, fine. And so the blastocyst now is going to embed itself in that layer, the endometrium. For animals that have more than one ova, so like swine, these blastocysts will kind of space themselves along the 2 different horns and the body. But you can see at this point, the blastocyst, that's a lot of cells. And it can't just get nutrients from diffusion. It needs some sort of more effective method. And what do you think that method would be? Well, you'll see in just a second. So now let's just watch the morula implant. This part of the video has all sorts of technical terms that we do not need to know. So there's the blastocyst, and it kind of burrows into the endometrium. I don't know how. Just kind of sinks into the endometrium of the uterus. And we don't care what a hypoblast is or any of that. It kind of burrows down. And again, we don't need to know what I can't even pronounce that. But what's going to happen is this is now going to lead to the formation of this amazing little structure called the placenta. So the placenta is a life support system, right? It's going to surround the offspring. It'll connect the offspring to the uterus, and that's going to provide for the huge metabolic needs of the offspring, right? These little guys are growing quickly, and they need lots of oxygen, lots of protein, lots of fats. And so this placenta, it's a multi-layered, fluid-filled sac or sacs that develops around the embryo, and it's also going to attach the embryo to the uterus. So here's the placenta. Actually, here's the uterus. Now, somehow, wherever that original blastocyst formed, it led to the creation of this structure called the placenta, which the two, however you want it. Here's the uterus, here's the placenta. They're sort of interlocked now, and then the rest of the placenta is formed here. I couldn't really find any good. I wanted to find a good 3-dimensional video of the placenta, and I couldn't find any. I found a lot of videos that tell you, whether you should or should not eat your placenta, but I could not find any that talked about that kind of helped us to picture it, to visualize it, right? Don't eat your placenta. And then there's some prank with Kourtney Kardashian where she pretends to serve placenta to her family. Anyway, so I'll do my best to explain the placenta to you. So just let's start over here. There's the uterus. And so there's all these little capillaries, right, of the mom. And there's also all these little capillaries from the placenta. And remember, capillaries are very, very thin, and so nutrients can diffuse. Oxygen can diffuse across capillaries. Glucose, other nutrients can diffuse across the capillaries from high concentration to low concentration. and we'll see that some of the capillaries of the fetus are going to have low oxygen, and so oxygen will diffuse from one capillary bed to another capillary bed. That's kind of weird, but that's what happens. So right here, this is where everything gets exchanged. This is where nutrients and waste products will get exchanged. And you'll see later that there's that different species have sort of a different different attachment sites, and that has some important health implications that we'll talk about. So this layer forms two sacs. Let's talk about this layer here. The sac that's immediately around the fetus is called the amniotic sac. Amniotic sac. Wait, amniotic? Amniotic. Did I make a typographical error there? It's amniotic sac. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. Hold on. I'm just gonna run and grab the book. Hold on. All right, I'm back. Okay, that is misspelled. It's amniotic sac, not amnionic. So where it says amnionic, change that to amniotic sac. It's been kind of a long semester. Okay, so the amniotic sac surrounds the fetus, and then that sac is actually inside of another sac called the allantoic sac. Now this picture doesn't really show the allantoic sac, but it does show that it does show its outer layer, which is called the chorion. And the chorion it's all this, but the chorion specifically is where the placenta attaches to the uterus. And by the way, the book talks about amnion or amniotic sac, or an allantois or allantoic sac, and I'm just going to use the words amniotic sac and allantoic sac. Okay, so again, this shows it a little better. There's our little guy inside his amniotic sac. I don't know why did I put amniotic sac there twice? I don't know. And then this is the other sac is called the allantoic sac. And so again, this is all placenta, and in some way it's going to be attached to the uterus. And then there's the chorion, where it's just the outer layer of the allantoic sac, and that would be what, and then this whole thing would be surrounded by uterus, of course. And again, this is just showing the same thing. It's prettier because it's in color. And again, there I am putting the word amniotic sac, so I don't know what's wrong with me. Okay, right? So get sac within a sac. And in fact, when someone says my water broke, it's the allantoic sac that breaks first. So, so that's this sac. When the water breaks, this sac is broken, but the amniotic sac is normal. It has, hopefully, it has not broken yet. Okay. All right. So we have this placenta that's attached to the uterus, and nutrients and waste products are being exchanged. Well, now let's look at nutrients and oxygen first. Okay, so nutrients and oxygen have entered the have left the mom's capillaries, and they've entered the capillaries of the placenta. Well, now that needs to get into the fetus, and what will happen is all of those capillaries with the I think it's okay if I call them capillaries. They are now going to lead up the umbilical cord. So there's the umbilical cord here, It's just showing you the placenta here. It's not really separated from the wall of the uterus. So we have this little tube with these blood vessels going. Some of the blood vessels are going up into the fetus, and others are leaving the fetus. This cord also contains something called the urachus, and that's actually what the fetus, quote unquote, urinates out of. It's attached to the bladder, and and we'll talk more about the urachus in a moment. But we've got these blood vessels in here. Some are called umbilical arteries, and some are called umbilical veins. And so is the umbilical arterial blood, is it oxygenated and nutrient filled, or is it deoxygenated and waste filled? So just ask yourself, well, what does an artery mean? Artery means it's leaving the heart. And so anything that's leaving the heart of the fetus, it sounds bizarre, but it's actually deoxygenated blood. It's the blood coming from the mom that's oxygenated, and that's what's traveling up the umbilical vein. So this is actually the umbilical vein here. They made it red. It's traveling to the heart of the fetus, and anyway, it's not super important. In fact, I'm probably not going to ask any questions about that. But again, it's a good reminder that artery does not always mean oxygenated, right? The pulmonary artery does not carry oxygenated blood, and neither does the umbilical artery. But I'll warn you that I've seen questions on like VT&E study guides where they ask, what kind of blood is in the umbilical artery. I mean, who cares? But just so you know, I'm not going to ask you, but somebody might. And that urachus, which again is not shown here, that will run into the allantoic sac, right, the outer sac. So that raises this question: do fetuses pee and do they poop? And we'll talk about that in just a moment. This is again just a close-up. Again, just showing you, right, here's the placenta and all the oxygenated blood coming from the mom, intermingling with these little capillaries of the placenta, and then bringing oxygenated blood up the umbilical cord. And I just wanted to remind you, we talked about this when we talked about the cardiovascular system. The fetus doesn't need to supply, it doesn't need to oxygenate its own blood. Blood goes, to the lungs so they can develop, but blood does not go to the alveoli. And blood doesn't really go through the liver. So just as a reminder, when you were a fetus, you had these shunts. One shunt was designed to kind of bypass the liver. That was the ductus venosus. There's it's more of a hole between the right atrium. This makes it look like it's really between the right atrium and the left atrium. The foramen ovale, there's the ductus arteriosus. So again, these were ways to redirect blood away from the lungs and just to get pumped to general circulation. I realize as I'm talking, I'm like, well, gosh, that blood is still oxygenated. So wouldn't, anyway, that's why as I'm talking, I realize I'm getting a little confused about umbilical arteries. So let's just it's not that important. Okay. And this is not really that important either, but it's kind of interesting, right? So do fetuses poop? Let's find out.
The little scar in the middle of your abdomen marks the place where, for about 9 glorious months, all the nutrients you needed to grow and develop and survive flowed straight into your bloodstream while you just floated around in a sack of amniotic fluid. But have you ever wondered what was going on with your other bodily functions while you were in that enclosed space? To put it a little more bluntly, did you, pee and poop in there? The answer to question number 1 is yes, definitely. Embryos start peeing after just 2 months of development, around the time they first begin swallowing and therefore drinking amniotic fluid. This does essentially mean that fetuses spend 7 months drinking their own pee, but that's actually not as gross as it sounds. For one thing, urine, unlike feces, is sterile, so it doesn't contain bacteria that could make the fetus sick. Also, the waste products we normally get rid of by urinating, like excess nitrogen, are instead filtered from the fetus and delivered through the umbilical cord back to the mother for disposal. And what about the waste we normally get rid of by pooping? Well, mom takes care of that, too, indirectly. She digests food before it gets to the baby, absorbing nutrients like sugar and protein into her bloodstream and then passing those nutrients to her fetus through the umbilical cord. So most of the potential poop products stay with the mother. The fetus's digestive system isn't totally empty though. Some waste does go there and get broken down by acidic bile in the small intestines, producing a slimy, sticky greenish mass called meconium. But unlike the large intestine of everyone outside a womb, a fetus's large intestine is mostly sterile and devoid of the billions of bacteria that break down our waste and make up as much as 50% of the brown pulp known as feces. So the green, sticky mass that forms in a fetus's small intestines eventually becomes a green, sticky, and mostly bacteria-free mass inside the baby's first diaper. And in a way, it's the first and last clean poop in anyone's life.
All right. Let's see here. Now, I don't. He says we drink that urine. That's not important. I don't know. It's not really urine the way we think of urine, because your kidneys aren't very well developed then. But there is a fluid that you produce. But again, it travels through this urachus into the allantoic sac, and that urachus usually closes at birth. Not always. So, and we'll talk more about that next year. Okay. So remember I said that there's these, where the chorion attaches to the uterus, something important happens. What happens? That's where those capillaries intermingle, the maternal capillaries and the fetal or the placental capillaries, right? That's where exchange takes place, exchanging good stuff for bad stuff, right? The mom's going to provide the nutrients and oxygen and things like that. Well, these placentas are going to look very different depending on the species, and we call these different attachment sites. And I'll show you pictures of them as well as I can. So there's 4 different types. There's the diffuse type. That's what we see in pigs and horses and camelids. There's this cotyledonary type. Again, that word is cotyledonary, and we see that in the ruminants, so cattle and sheep and goats. There's a discoid type where there's this kind of one spot. We see that in rabbits and rodents and people too. And then this zonary form is in dogs and cats. Okay, so I'm gonna show you actual placentas for these 4 different types. And again, these are the placentas, right? There's a uterus completely surrounding them. So this is inside. You have to imagine a uterus, and then each of these, right? That's a placenta. So there's some little creature in there, right? That would be a little foal fetus. This would be a little calf fetus. So I'm trying to draw as well as I can. So let's first talk about the diffuse attachments. How does the book describe it? They just refer to it as 4 different types. So we'll call it the diffuse placenta. This is seen in horses, and if you look at the placenta, you don't really see anything. It's just a smooth, and this would be the allantoic part, right? This is the chorion on the outside of it. And so if you look at it, it's just, there's nothing there. It just looks like this smooth tissue, right? So you see this just kind of looks like a blanket almost. That's the diffuse one. There's no small focal areas. The opposite of that would be in the cattle, in the ruminants, I should say, where we have these these discrete sites of attachment. And that's these little red spots here. These spots are where nutrient and wastes are exchanged. Are any nutrients and wastes exchanged where I'm pointing right now? No. It's only at these spots. These spots here, these, I'll talk more about them in a moment. It's at these spots where the placenta and the uterus come together. Right? They come together. With the horse, nutrient and waste exchange occurs all over. It's this diffuse across the placenta. But again, here, it's only going to be in these discrete spots. And again, you can see here's a little calf, and there's his placenta, and you can actually see these are, we'll call them, they're called cotyledons. You can see those on him. And again, this is looking at it with the fetus inside. Again, there's these cotyledons on the chorion. Okay. And if you look at the two together, now we're looking still at this, at a cow. Again, there's the cotyledon. And if you ever see this, it looks like Velcro. The cotyledon and the part on the uterus is called a caruncle. And the two just, they're like Velcro. They just interdigitate, and it's very satisfying to peel them apart. Together, and here you can actually see the caruncle and the cotyledon together. This is where they attach. This is where oxygen and nutrients get exchanged. Together, it's called a placentome. And so I don't know why they don't call this a placentome placenta. They call it, they name it after the cotyledons. Now, there's a reason why I'm telling you all these terms, because there's a really fun and famous way to remember all this. You may be wondering, what is the thing called on the mom? What's that button called? And the way you can remember it's a caruncle is mom drives the car, right? The caruncles are found on the maternal side because mom drives the car. And I just remember how tickled I was to learn that in veterinary school. Mom drives the car. But I'm just going to jump ahead real quick here just to show you this cow, her whole uterus has prolapsed. I just want to show you, you can see those buttons on her uterus, right? So those are her caruncles. The placenta's gone, but she just calved like yesterday, and so she still has those big old caruncles on her uterus. Just wanted to show you that. Okay, dogs and cats have this called zonary attachment. So again, this would be, here we're actually, this gets a little confusing because, you know, each little puppy has his like own little sac, and each little sac has its own little zone. I can't really find a great picture, but this is a C-section. You'll see the veterinarian gets the puppy out, and then you're going to see him pull. I guess he's pulling. I guess I don't know if it's the allantoic sac. I think it's it's definitely the allantoic sac he's pulling out. Now I got it. For things, when there's multiple puppies, piglets, kittens, each one has its own allantoic sac inside its own amniotic sac. So you'll see him take the puppy out. Let's watch this together. So that's a uterus. And did I miss oh, there's the puppy. Okay, so he's got the puppy out. And you're going to see him, the puppy's already out of its amniotic sac, but you're going to see him, he's going to gently pull And you'll see he's pulling, it's that zonary attachment is why he has to kind of gently pull. If he pulls too hard, it'll bleed. So he's just kind of gently pulling the rest of the placenta off of the uterus. But again, that's that attachment site you saw where he was pulling. That's where the placenta attaches to the uterus. And then I couldn't really find a great picture, but this discoid method, that's what you and I had when we were fetuses, right? So there was this kind of disc of the, so he's inside, he or she's inside an amniotic sac, and there's this particular part that's like disc shaped that's attached to the uterus. Well, why does this matter? Well, and it really only matters for these two, for the diffuse and the cotyledonary. So just by looking at them, which type do you think would separate most easily from a uterus, and which would separate with the most difficulty? Well, I'm hoping you're going to say this type looks like it would separate more easily, and this type looks like it would separate with more difficulty. The reason that's important is because mares, they have a problem of premature separation. That diffuse placenta will detach before its time. That's a condition called red bag, and that's an emergency. It means that the whole fetus inside of its placenta has detached from the uterus. That means it's not going to be able to get oxygen. Cows have the opposite problem. In fact, let me just show you red bag. So this is a foal. This is a mare with this. That's the chorion, right? That's not the amniotic sac. That's the chorion that is part of surrounding the allantoic sac. So that's an emergency. And I have another picture I'll show you. Cows have an opposite problem. They'll give birth, everything's fine, but sometimes the placenta will not detach. It'll keep sticking to the uterus. And that problem is called retained placenta. And you'll see these cows with its placenta just hanging there, and it gets all rotten and stinky, and it still won't come off. And so I couldn't find a great video, but this is a veterinarian, and he's holding these kind of rotten, stinky, this placenta hanging from this cow. And you can try to gently tug on it, but sometimes it just falls apart, and so the cow has to go on antibiotics. So anyway, not a great video, but this is kind of this rather stinky old placenta hanging from the cow. So, and this is just showing you, showing you red bag, having oxygen ready for the foal. I hope one of you talks about red bag this week. I'm going to show you pictures today, but I don't want to talk much about it. And again, this is that cow we saw. The other problem with these cotyledons, with this type of placenta, is that as we're delivering the calf, we can sometimes pull too hard, and it'll start to cause the uterus to turn inside out and prolapse like this. All right. Now, I don't have any breaks. I don't have any little reviews. I can certainly make a Quizlet, but if you want to just hit pause and take a break, then just do that. I don't have any breaks built in. So, all right, I'll continue. All right, so once an animal is pregnant, then what? Well, there's, we call that the gestation period, right? That's the time period that they're pregnant. And regardless of whether it's, 1 month or 2 years, we break pregnancy, the gestation period, we break it into 3 different trimesters. That first trimester is kind of the trimester of the embryo. It's when it gets it it's it's implanted, and it's also beginning to develop um, its placenta, and there's some development taking place in the embryo. The second trimester is called the period of fetal development. That's when all the different organs are developing: the brain, the spinal cord, the liver, the heart. All these tissues are differentiating. And in that third trimester, everything's differentiated: kidneys, spleen, bones, you name it. Just now things are going to grow, right? So these guys behind me here, they're fully developed. They just need to grow now. And so you're going to need to memorize the gestation periods of certain animals: the cat, the dog, pigs, goats, sheep, cows, and horses. But I'm going to help you. And by the way, look at that. The elephant is pregnant 660 days. Wow. Okay. So you can group certain animals together. Cats and dogs are both about 2 months. Goats and sheep are both about 5 months. The cow is 9 months, okay, kind of like people. And cows are polyestrous like people, so that can help. And horses are 11 months. And we learned how they begin to cycle in the spring so that they'll have their foal the following year. Pigs are a little odd, but if you can just remember the number 3, there are 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days is the gestation period of pigs. So, and by the way, I love talking about pregnancy, and there are so many things I'd love to talk with you about that we just don't have time for. So, but there's so many just really amazing opportunities and problems. Okay, so there's one little problem I'll talk about. One of you might be talking about that this week in the discussion. This one's a little sad. Okay, this one I'm going to show you is a little sad. It's not funny. But if you work with livestock, these are things you need to know about. There are certain plants that can harm the developing fetus. So this is one called veratrum. You can buy this at nurseries. It's a very pretty plant, right? Isn't that pretty? It's sometimes called skunk cabbage. I don't know why. Maybe it smells a little bit. The problem is it is a teratogen, and we've heard the word teratogen in pharmacology. Like this week, you're learning about an antifungal called griseofulvin. It can be a teratogen in cats. And so the word terato means monster, yeah, and gen means to make. So a teratogen is something that can, it's kind of an unkind term, but it can cause some horrible change in the developing embryo or fetus. And so here's what veratrum can do. It causes a condition called cyclopsia. And if you know your Greek mythology or you've watched Percy Jackson, you know what a cyclops is. So now I'm going to show you what can happen if a ewe or a doe or a cow eats skunk cabbage in the first trimester. It can cause these changes that they're horrible to see, and the fetus won't make it. It'll kill the fetus. So here's the horrible picture. All right, there you go. Just to we'll move on from there. Just to kind of show you there are all sorts of horrible things that can happen to our clients and our patients. Okay, and there are others you can learn about, lupine, and there's others you might choose to study or talk about in discussion this week. Okay, but back to happier things. Parturition, right? That's the actual birth process. And think of all the changes that take place. You go from being in this nice, warm, watery environment to suddenly you're having to breathe, and it's cold and it's dry. Ugh. So, but what factors actually lead to parturition? Well, there are many, and we don't entirely understand them all. But 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 here's what triggers this process called parturition. It's actually the foal, I mean, not the foal, it's actually the fetus that signals when it's time to give birth. It's not really the mom that decides, it's her baby. The baby experiences stress, and so the baby releases cortisol, right, the stress hormone, from its, well, I'm sorry, not from up here, from the adrenal gland. Okay, so its adrenal gland releases cortisol that travels through the, out to the placenta to the mom. So the fetus's cortisol causes the mom's placenta to release prostaglandins. It makes actually her placenta and her uterus release prostaglandins, in particular one called prostaglandin F2 alpha, and its job is to destroy the corpus luteum. It's going to destroy the corpus luteum. And remember what the corpus luteum makes. It makes progesterone. So cortisol from the fetus causes prostaglandin F2 alpha from the uterus and placenta. That destroys the corpus luteum, and that takes away progesterone. No progesterone means that's the end of pregnancy. It's time to get born. Also, together, the estrogen and the prostaglandins, they're gonna increase that muscle layer called the myometrium. It'll increase its sensitivity to oxytocin. And so that's going to cause these contractions to begin. It'll also help with milk letdown. But right now, we don't care about milk. We care about uterine contractions. And remember, the oxytocin, that's that hormone made from the posterior pituitary gland. And one of the things it does is, again, it helps, it makes smooth muscle of the uterus contract. Now, labor is made up of 3 different stages, and we'll talk about each of those stages. The first stage, we'll call it the stage of uterine contractions. These are not the big, strong uterine contractions. These are kind of small uterine contractions. And what they're doing, here's her uterus. It's as they contract, they're making the nose or snout of the fetus kind of bump up into the cervix. So there I'm a little fetus bumping into the cervix. And that bumping, it triggers other hormones which cause the cervix to gradually dilate. And remember that. Remember what I said just now about this bumping action, just the little nose of the fetus bumping into the cervix. That bump, it's kind of like knocking on a door, and slowly the door will open. While that's happening, I wrote mare, but it could be a dog, it could be whatever, is going to be kind of restless. For a mare, she's going to be circling her stall. Other animals like dogs and pigs, they may start to build little nests. This first stage of labor is the longest. It can be 6 to 12 hours in the dog, 1 to 4 hours in the mare. A helpful hint, if you have an owner with a pregnant dog, they're not sure when she's due, tell them to check her body temperature twice a day. And often it'll drop by 1 degree, the day before she's about to go into labor. So, see, there's so many cool things. No time. Now, this slide is to remind me of a story. It was some people, they had a dog. She was supposed to be in labor. And they said, we got the kids over and the grandkids, and we got lights set up, and we got video cameras. And then she stops going into labor. and they didn't know what to do. And I said, turn off the lights and turn off the cameras and leave the poor dog alone, because she was probably stressed. And we learned um, 2 weeks ago with the endocrine system, you learned how cortisol is a steroid hormone. It will go into cells and it will interfere with hormones that act on the surface of cells, in particular, um, 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 hormones like oxytocin. And so when there's lots of cortisol, oxytocin just can't work. Now, God bless this family. They don't seem to care that everybody's around, but I'm just telling you, most dogs do not want, and cows and horses, they don't want, everyone in the county gathered around watching them. Okay. The second stage of labor, this is the actual delivery of the newborn. It should only take, it could take it, it depends on the animal, but it shouldn't take very long, maybe an hour or less. Um, Again, if we had time, we could talk about some of the warning signs that could mean that you need to call the veterinarian. Um, um, at this point, this is when you get the full-blown uterine contractions. Once, and I said like an hour, I mean, some of these, it's like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and the baby is out. So the water's breaking. You can see that here. You can start to see the amniotic sac coming out. Again, the book says that when the water breaks, that it's the allantoic and the amniotic sac. So that's fine. It doesn't matter. And then out comes the amniotic sac, and that's what this, you can see there it is. There's a diffuse placenta on our little foal here. Sometimes the sac is still on them, and so you or the owner, has to rupture it. And there's all sorts of cool little tricks where you clear their nose out, and you get them, you suck mucus out of their nose. It's so much fun. And then stage 3 is the expulsion of the rest of the placenta. I guess the rest of the allantoic portion. So, and this can take 1 to 4 hours. And a lot of animals, they do like to eat their placenta. So it's not unusual if they are munching on their placenta. One reason they do that for like a cow is if you leave the placenta around, well, then like a wolf or a coyote or a dog, if they see a placenta, they may know that there's some little defenseless baby around. So eating the placenta is a way of, eating the evidence. Okay. And now there's a baby. But of course, that's not the end of the story. The uterus, which was gigantic, has to now return to its normal size. And that leads us to our next topic, which is involution of the uterus. And a question you'll get, an owner calls you about, I said about his birth. I meant to write his bitch. Okay. So the female dog had puppies about 2 weeks ago, and she's still continuing to make this thick, odorless, dark red-brown discharge from her vulva. Should he be concerned? Well, no, he should not be concerned. This process of involution, as the uterus shrinks down, the uterus goes from this to this. Well, now it has to go from this back down to this and even smaller. And that big, thick endometrium is now going to slough away. And it produces this liquid. Sometimes it's called lotia, lotia. It starts out green, maybe because it has meconium in it. That's when the baby's first born. You'll see green discharge, but it can continue for weeks, being this kind of thick red-brown discharge. It should have no odor. It can go on for weeks. It's totally normal. If it's stinky, if it's watery, if it's black, that's not normal, and that's usually a sign that she has metritis, right? Some sort of an infection. All right. Um, and then let's talk about dystocia. Again, we can't really give it justice, but we'll say a few things about dystocia. Dystocia just refers to a difficult birth. And I thought you might be interested to see just a normal delivery. So certainly I encourage you just to Google normal deliveries. But this is a cow, and let's just watch this. Okay. So there's a cow. There's a amniotic sac. You can see a couple of hooves sticking out. And they're helping her out. This, why does she need help? Maybe the calf is kind of big. Maybe the head was turned around. But you see how the chains are put on, right? You're double looping the chains. And every time she contracts, that's when they pull. They only pull when she contracts. Now, the little calf, if his umbilical cord is still attached, then he's still getting oxygen. The concern is if he's coming backwards or breech, in other words, we get worried that once the umbilical cord tears, then he's dependent on inhaling oxygen. So he may be okay. His umbilical cord, is probably still attached. Or I could be wrong, and we just need to get him out as soon as possible. Usually, we're trying to get him out as soon as possible. And I don't know, maybe he's breathing through his nose. Anyway, he's going to be fine. You can hear the poor mom. So I think someone needs to get in there and help with that head. They know what they're doing. Also, you see they're kind of pulling down. If they pulled straight back, it wouldn't work as well. So they're kind of pulling down because it follows the natural kind of curve of her pelvic canal. If they just put the chains around once, that doesn't distribute the pressure, and you can break his foot. Yay! And you see he's trying to keep his head out of the dirt a little bit. Yay! Hey, everybody's happy. And he's just there. Isn't that great? Happy little mom. What happened? I love cows. Okay, well, I guess that's all. Nothing more to see there. All right, so let's see, stop sharing. Okay. Okay. So again, dystocia refers to difficult birth, and there's lots of different things that can cause it. Sometimes in dogs, for example, they can have just like a dog with one puppy. The puppy can be jumbo puppy and be just too big to be delivered. Some dogs have so many puppies that they have, it's called uterine inertia. Sometimes they just get tired. Sometimes the fetus is in the wrong position. So these are normal positions. Even that is normal. This is abnormal, and there's a problem here. Remember I said how the fetus is knocking on the door? Well, this fetus will knock on the door against the cervix, and this fetus is knocking on the door. But this fetus is breech. His little butt is not able to reach the cervix. And so this cow may not even realize that it's time to have a baby. She may never really develop very strong uterine contractions. Her cervix may never really dilate because he's breech. His butt is not really bumping into the cervix. This guy is a little different. He's bumping, but his head is turned around, and so she can't get him out. He needs to be in kind of a diving position like this. But if one head is back, there's no way to deliver him. But you know, you or the farmer or I, we can reach in there and reposition the head. Okay, so now we're born, and as our final topic will be lactation. So we're talking now about mammary glands. We all have them, but the you know only the female is anything ever going to happen. And they look very different, right? So some animals have two udders. Can you tell which animals these are? All right, so this is a mare, right? So horses have two, and this could be a goat or a sheep. They only have two. Cows have four, and some animals like pigs have, like, how many does she have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, she's got like at least 17 times 2, 14 teats. Cats and dogs have what? They have like 8. So you can sort of assume that if you've got more than, if you've got 2 teats, you may be able to handle 2 animals. I don't know why cows have 4, because they don't have 4 calves. But anyway, we're going to use the cow mammary gland as kind of our model, but everything we're going to say about the cow applies to mares, hamsters, any mammal. There's this, you'll see, it's called the suspensory ligament. This is called the median suspensory ligament, and it's just what it sounds like. It's a tough band of connective tissue that it kind of helps give the udder shape. One nice thing about the udder is, or any mammary gland, is they're all separate. Even the pig, each gland is a separate unit. That's important because if you get mastitis in one gland, it won't necessarily spread into the other glands because each gland is separate. Each gland is made up of a little milk-producing unit. It's a cluster of cells, of a structure, I should say, called alveoli. And so they're very, you can think of them as being very similar to the alveoli in the lungs, these little grape-like structures. The difference here is they're making milk. So you just have tens of thousands of these little alveoli. They're going to make milk that are going to travel down these minor ducts and collect in these major ducts, and eventually, with the help of oxytocin, they can come down into these different sinuses. This is called the gland sinus and the teat sinus, and together, once the milk is in there, that's when the calf or the puppy or the piglet can suck it through the streak canal. And down in that actual teat, there's a little muscle and a little plug of keratin. So this is the teat now, where the milk would come out. Before she ever is nursed or milked, this little plug of keratin is there. And its job is to prevent bacteria from moving up into the teat sinus. Once she starts nursing, she loses that, but she still has this muscle called the teat sphincter that closes down so that in between nursing, in between milking, it should keep out bacteria. The mammary development, a lot of different hormones are involved. We're not really going to talk much about that. It is helpful to understand the actual process of lactation. So the process begins towards the end of, I meant to write the end of pregnancy, not the end of production. So it begins toward the end of pregnancy, and then it's really developed after parturition. You've got the hormone called prolactin and growth hormone. They kind of get the process started. The mammary gland is going to produce first this pre-milk. It's not really like milk. But we call it colostrum, and we talked about that when we talked about the immune system. It's really high in proteins and fat and amino acids. It has a laxative effect to help get that kind of sticky meconium out. But what is the most special thing about colostrum? Is it contains antibodies, right? Or you can call them immunoglobulins, right? These are these proteins that will they will stick to particular pathogens, um, and it'll make it easier for your macrophages to engulf them and identify them. It causes pathogens to clump together. Um, Colostrum is one of those examples of passive immunity. And you and I and dogs and cats, we get it through colostrum. We also get it across the placenta. You're actually born with some of your mom's antibodies. But in horses and cows and sheep and goats, there's something about that placenta um, where they are born with almost none of their mom's antibodies. So they are really dependent on that colostrum. And they have to get it in the first few hours of life, or else their gut will close off in a way where it only allows these antibodies to pass through for a little while. And remember, these aren't just any old antibodies. These are antibodies the mom has made that are specific to particular diseases or vaccines. So they could really save the the little guy's life. You know, a dog, for example, if the mom had the parvo vaccine, then she's going to have antibodies to parvo, and then her puppy will get antibodies to parvo, which could help save its life. Okay, so colostrum is so important that at dairies, they actually, when they get colostrum, they have this kind of simple device called a colostrometer. It's just this, they fill this large beaker up with colostrum, and then they put the colostrometer in. And then if it's really dense with protein, it will float, and the thing will float, and the green zone will be at the top of the milk. If it's not very good colostrum, then the whole thing kind of sinks into like the yellow or the red zone, and they could still use it. They just wouldn't want to use it for that very first feeding. Anyway, so once lactation's begun, you know, the mammary glands are making milk. It will continue so long as there is regular nursing or milking. It may start to go down, but it will continue. It all begins with, you know, as nursing or milking takes place, milking like hand milking or from a milking machine, signals go to the hypothalamus, and then the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is going to make two hormones. It'll make prolactin, right? We mentioned that earlier. That's actually going to cause milk to be produced by those alveolar cells. And then the posterior pituitary gland is going to release oxytocin, and it's going to work on these kind of odd, they're kind of like muscles. It's not quite like smooth muscle. They're called myoepithelial cells, but it makes them contract, and that will actually will move when they contract. They'll move milk out of the alveoli into these ducts. And then when the milking machine is put on, or you hand milk, or the little piglet sucks, that they're going to get the milk out of that out of the teat sinus that we talked about. But once you stop milking, or the patient is weaned and they stop nursing, then that signal to the hypothalamus stops, and then all these other signals will stop. The pituitary gland will stop releasing prolactin. The posterior pituitary gland will stop releasing oxytocin. And so the milk will just dry up. Or we call that involution. And this shows you we're inside those little alveoli, and you're just going to see them producing milk. So there they are producing their milk. And this video, it doesn't really show the myoepithelial cells contracting. You just have to kind of use your imagination. So that's, I guess that's blood flowing, but through all these little ducts here, milk will flow and eventually make its way down to the sinuses. All right, just like I said, how stress can mess with oxytocin during stage 2 labor, well, stress can also mess with oxytocin with milking. And so if we were in class, I would have Caroline talk a little bit about this. If you go to a dairy, you work around dairy cows or dairy goats, anything involving the milking parlor or it's usually a very calm place. You don't want people who are yelling and screaming at the cows because if she feels stress, she won't let her milk down. In fact, some dairies, they'll set it up. So by the way, at dairies, they separate the cow from the calf, right? They don't let the cow and the calf hang out. They just separate them at birth. Okay. And so what happens then, the cow will be walking to the milking parlor, and they'll sometimes have the calves within earshot. So as she's walking to the milking parlor, she can hear all these calves going, "meh, meh," and that sound will make her start to lactate. I'm sorry, not lactate. It will cause her to release oxytocin, and so it'll cause milk let down, so that when the gentleman or woman who's going to milk the cow, it'll be easier on the cow. She'll make more milk. It won't, the machine won't have to suck very hard. So anyway, that's another reason to be nice to dairy animals. And the same would be true if you had a new mom, whether it's a dog or a cat or a pig. You don't want to have a noisy, stressful environment for her and her puppies or her kittens, because that could affect her milk production. Okay, so again, I just want to just throw in one last weird little thing. This is like an actual phone call I got where a client wanted to know if she could use cabbage leaves to help treat mastitis. So I just thought we would end on another practical note. We could get infections of the mammary gland. You'll know this because the milk will have this kind of brown, watery kind of appearance. It's good to tell owners to watch the mammary glands, whatever kind of animal it is. They can even check, they can just gently squeeze the teat, and it should look like milk. But if it's all brown and watery or sandy, kind of brown, sandy, that could be infection. And it can get so bad, here's another gross picture, it can get so bad that the gland just kind of ruptures open. So that's what you're seeing here in this, so here's her teat, bacteria got up the teat somehow, and then they set up shop with all this warm, delicious milk, and they kind of get trapped in there, and it just ruptures open like that. So she can be okay, but she's going to need to be on antibiotics, and then that will probably mean that the puppies can't nurse anymore because she'll have antibiotics in her milk. So a lot can go wrong. So when owners say they want to breed their dogs, try to explain to them all the things that can go wrong. Are they sure that they want to bottle feed 9 puppies? Because that's what happened with this dog. And by the way, so that dog would need non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and warm compresses and antibiotics. And strangely, cabbage actually can help. So Another weird little tip for the day. And that is our talk on pregnancy, development, and lactation. Again, I'm sorry we didn't have any real breaks. Hopefully you found that interesting. If you have any questions, please contact me and I'll get this uploaded now. All right, everyone. Hope you're doing good.